Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Good evening. Want to welcome everyone for joining today, wherever you are in the world. We're so delighted to have you. My name is Jennifer Morris. I'm with MadCap Software, and I am beyond excited to welcome our presenter today, Neil Perlin, who is the founder of Hyperword Services. So today's session is going to dive into Flair's Stylesheet Editor, and Neil is going to discuss 7 tips that will help take your skills to the next level. So if you're new to using MadCap Flair, or if you're considering adopting Flair to manage your content more intelligently, or perhaps you've been using it for some time, I think you'll really enjoy this session and hopefully come away with some light bulb moments. So a little bit about Neil. Neil's been providing online documentation, training, and consulting services for over 25 years. He's a popular speaker at various technical communication groups and conferences, including MadCap's own Mad World Learning Conference, and is an internationally recognized expert in online help and documentation design and development. Now, if that's not enough, just as a side note, he's also an expert in the art of barbecue and blogs about his findings on some of his best barbecue establishments found during his travels. So encourage you to check that out. That said, he is one of the most patient and knowledgeable educators I have had the pleasure of knowing. So we're thrilled to have you with us today. So welcome, Neil. Now, as always, we have a lot to cover. So just 2 quick items of business before we begin, so everybody knows. And so we'll go to the next slide. One thing we want to remind everybody is that the webinar will be recorded. And so we'll be sending out a link to this webinar as soon as it's done processing. And it will be on our website. So if you have to pop out early, not to worry, we'll get you everything. There's also a questions panel in the GoToWebinar console. Would encourage you all to use that to post questions in there. Or if for whatever reason you can't see the screen or something's wrong, we'll do our best to help you, or I'll do my best to help you behind the scenes. So with that out of the way, I know, Neil, you've got a lot to cover. So welcome again. Thanks for joining us. And I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
All right. Very good. Thank you, Jennifer. Quick sound check. Can you hear me clearly? Am I coming through okay?
I hear you loud and clear.
All right. Very good. Thank you very much. All right. I'd like to welcome everybody. Thank you for coming to this session. A little background about who I am. As Jennifer said, I've been doing this for a while. I actually got into TechCom in 1979, got into hypertext in the late 80s, and personally created the 2nd and 3rd hypertext product ever released. One of which, just to date things, was an online guide to MS-DOS 2.1. So I like to think I've been doing this long enough to have made at least the basic silly mistakes, and as appropriate, I'll talk about them as we go through this. So, and more specifically, I've been working in CSS since around 1999. It's a little bit vague as to exactly when, but I've been doing it for a while. So, what I'm going to do here is cover 7 things, 3 skills and 4 tips, because my experience is that a lot of people who are just coming into Flair are new to the CSS, to styles and style sheets and the Stylesheet Editor. So what I want to do is go over some of these things quickly so that to make sure that everybody understands the basics of what we're going to be working with. And then what I'll do is demo 4 things that you can do with the Stylesheet Editor as samples. So starting off with the question, what is local formatting? And I always ask this because I find that a lot of people who are new to Flair are coming in from Word and they're accustomed to doing local formatting. And local formatting is simply, as I say, using the font and paragraph options on the home ribbon. So in other words, you type some text and then select that text and apply maybe a different font size, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is evil. Do not do this. If you do local formatting, you will pay somewhere down the road, because local formatting is just very difficult to work with. So instead, what you want to do is work with styles. So the obvious question, what's a style? And a style, as I say here, is a named set of properties for a type of content. So in other words, your first level headings, well, the name is H1, and the set of properties are 16-point, navy, Arial, bold. So now I don't have to specify individually that my title text is 16-point, navy, then Arial, then bold. I just designate it as H1, and all those properties get applied in one shot. You have to apply most of the styles. In other words, when you create a style, let's say that you're creating a topic in which you've got a subhead. So you want to format that as heading 2. You have to click in that text and then tell Flare that you want to make it an H2, heading 2. And Flare will apply those properties appropriately. Flare does apply the H1 and the P tag, the basic styles, when you create a topic. After that, you have to apply the styles, but as I say, it's pretty simple. It's pretty quick. And the beauty of styles is that if you then have to change a property, let's say that you decide that you want head 1 to be black instead of navy blue, you don't have to do it in every single head 1. You just change it once in the H1 style, and the change applies to every use of that style. So it is a tremendous efficiency help. So, all right, that's cool. What's a style sheet? Well, a style sheet is pretty simple. It's a file, as I say, that contains all, I'll come back to that ideally in a minute. It contains all the styles and their properties for all the topics in a project. The reason I said ideally is that ideally you'd have one style sheet that contains all the styles and the properties, but you can have multiple style sheets. Or there are certain cases where you can have a style sheet that contains most of the styles, except for a couple of specific instances. But generally assume that a style sheet is one file with an extension of CSS, Cascading Style Sheet, contains all the styles. And again, for those of you who are coming from Word, this is conceptually like styles in Word, except that it's an open standard from the World Wide Web Consortium, the W3C. It's not Microsoft proprietary, and unlike in Word, it's separate from the content. All right, so everybody always asks, what is this cascading thing? And there's actually two definitions. One is that there are 3 ways to apply styles. So what we're going to talk about today, for the most part, is the external approach, which simply says that we have one CSS file that contains all the settings for all the properties for all the styles, and all the topics point to that one CSS file. So again, if you defined head 1 as blue and you decide to change it to green, you simply change it once in the external CSS, which you create, by the way, as part of a Flare project. You make the change in that CSS, you save, and every single topic that points to that style sheet gets the change registered immediately. So this is the most efficient way to work. However, there is this lowest priority thing, which again, I'll come back to in a minute. The second type, I almost never see anymore, and this is called embedded. And in this case, we're still using styles, but they're defined in the individual topics. This is pretty old. Like I say, I don't see it in fact, I can't think of the last time I have seen it. If you're working with old legacy files, you may see this, but it simply means that the styles are defined once in each topic. So it works like a style sheet, but the styles are embedded in the topic, so it's less efficient. Your worst case is in, again, local or inline, and this is formatting via the text formatting toolbar. So this is the least efficient in that all the styling that you want to do, you have to do once for each instance. The problem is the priority, because local or inline, same thing, has the highest priority. which means it will override the external styles. So if you're ever given, say, a Word document that has been imported into Flare, and for some reason all the topics in your Flare project use navy blue for heading 1, except one topic, let's say, where heading 1 is black and refuses to change no matter what you do, there's a good chance that that was formatted locally in Word, and that local formatting came along when you brought the file into Flare, and you simply have to override it. The second definition is the idea that we get inheritance. And what that says is that child styles, which Flare, in the latest versions of Flare, properly call selectors. In older versions, they were referred to as subclasses. It's basically the same thing. So a child style inherits settings from its parent. So as I say, if you have a normal style that's set to Arial, and you create a child style based on the normal style, it's going to use Arial by default, which is good, because it means it's saving you from having to specify Arial for that child style unless you want a different font. So again, this is good, it's useful, and again, the more properties you can define in a parent style, the more efficient your CSS, because the more styles, the more properties that you define in, let's say, your P style, then any child style under P will use those same settings automatically. And here's an example. In the image on the right, I have the P tag selected, and this is in Flare's own Stylesheet Editor. And all those styles under P, concept, context, index 1 through 9, etc. These are all child styles of P. So any change that you make to a property of P will change that property in all the selectors unless you define them separately. So again, if I change the font in P to my favorite, Comic Sans, do not take me literally, but if I change P to Comic Sans, every one of those child styles will use Comic Sans. All right, so, and with that quick conceptual background, let's go to the Stylesheet Editor. So there's two ways in which you can use the Stylesheet Editor. There's two views. They're called Simplified and Advanced. And if you look at the top of this image, the second button from the left says View Simplified. So that tells you that we're in Simplified view. And I'm using the word simplified here kind of loosely. What you see here is a list of all the styles in the style sheet. And I can select any one of these styles, double click it, and it's going to open up in the Properties dialog box, which you see here. And one of the reasons this is simplified, and I'm making little air quotes around simplified, is that it looks like Word. It looks like the Properties dialog box in Word or sort of in FrameMaker, so it's more familiar. But, and I find that a lot of people who are new to Flare start working in this mode, but I'm going to recommend that you not work in this mode and instead work in the advanced view. And you notice the second button from the left now says View Advanced. So this is telling me that, not surprisingly, I'm in the advanced view. The advanced view gives you access to all the capabilities in the style sheet, whereas the simplified view does not. There are some things that you can do in advanced view that you can't do in simplified view. And while the simplified view may look like overkill, and it can look pretty terrifying, you can ignore a lot of what's here, and I'll show you how to do that in a minute. So this is, again, the advanced view, and let's take a look at some things here, starting with style categories, and that's over on the left. You can tell Flare to display all the styles or list them by category. And here I've said display all the styles. What I could have said was, for example, only list paragraph styles, or only list styles, or dynamic effects styles. And this is up to you. Some people I know like to display the styles, list the styles by subcategory, because it gives them a shorter list than this. And I'm going to back up for a second. If you see the list over in the left column, P and then concept, index, mini talk, etc. If I said only show me paragraph styles, for example, it's going to give me a much shorter list. On the other hand, some people, myself included, prefer to list all the styles, because that way we're not wondering, where is that style that I'm looking for? Oh yeah, I told Flair to only show me a subset of the styles, and then you wind up having to go back and change which subset you're viewing. This is totally up to you. Property categories. And this is the option in the upper right. And you can display the properties, not the styles, but their properties in different ways. So one of them is just show the locally set properties, properties that you have set in this style sheet, show properties that you have set in this style sheet or an imported style sheet. And then one somewhat confusing one, show assorted relevant properties, and then show all properties. So what are we talking about? Well, here I'm saying show all properties, and it's doing exactly that. It's listing all the properties, but it's listing them in functional groups. So there's the font group and the background group and the box group and the table group and so on and so forth. And this is good if you know that you're looking for a particular property and you know what group, what functional group it's in. This is a great way to work because it adds some organization to the properties. The problem is, what if you're looking for a property but you don't remember what functional group it's in? Well, not a big deal. You just open up the font group and no, it's not in there. Okay, let's open up the background. No, it's not in there. Let's open up block, and eventually you say something obscene and you switch to alphabetical view. And that's that little icon over at the left end of my screenshot. And what this does is it lists all the properties in alphabetical order rather than by functional group, which is great if you know the name of the property you're looking for. Of course, the problem again is if you don't know the name of the property you're looking for, but you know what it's used for, then you might decide to go back to the functional group view instead. Again, there is no right answer here. Then we have this, show assorted relevant properties, which could probably be phrased as show me a list of only those properties that MadCap thinks I'm likely to use on a regular basis. But it would be hard to fit that in the field. So they called it assorted relevant properties. And what this does is just that. It lists the properties that MadCap considers to be most commonly used, and they're listed by functional group again. And again, how you work is entirely up to you. So I could say, for example, do this, show me assorted relevant properties by functional group, or I could click that little leftmost icon, which would list all the properties alphabetically. So again, how you work is up to you. I personally find it easier to work in this mode, assorted relevant properties. And I'm in this mode until there's a property that I know I'm looking for and I can't seem to find it. And then what that tells me is, okay, go back to show all properties. So in other words, my default setting is show me a subset of the properties, just to simplify things. All right, there's one thing that is really confusing, and I've been training for on Flair since I think 2005, and I got this question almost always in every single class: why are some properties repeated? And you notice here we have up at the top we have the padding settings in the box group, and then down below that, we actually have a padding group. So the obvious question is, does this mean that you can have two different sets of padding properties? And the answer is no. It's one set, but because they're being listed functionally, they're going to appear in two different places. So you'll know that it's the same thing, because any change that you make, let's say to the padding property in the upper group, you'll see that change reflected in the padding property in the lower group. So it's just one set of properties that appear in multiple places because functionally they show up in the same different groups. All right, so again, pretty much what I just said. Okay, so good. We're ready to set up to define the property values. So where do you find these? And some of them, like color and font size, are very clearly labeled. Some are not quite so clear. For example, where do you turn on underlining? Or where do you control underlining? For example, the default for a hyperlink is underlined, but that's for online output. Maybe for print output, for print output, you want to turn off the underlining so that the linked terms look like normal text. Great, not a problem. Where do you control the underlining? And the answer is under text decoration in the font group, which is of course obvious. Right? In other words, once you do something twice, it's obvious. Until you do that, it can be very difficult to figure out, where do I control the underlining? Learning this takes practice. There's no question about it. You're going to be banging your way through the styles and through the properties and through their settings to figure out, what does a particular property cover? Some of them are fairly obvious. Some of them not so obvious. The ones that are obvious, for example, like color, you'll get that from a drop-down. So here's all your colors. Or text decoration. And again, this is none, underline, overline, line through, and the ever popular blink, which I've used a few times in my career. I'm not sure if I should be proud of this or ashamed of this, but there are a few cases where I've wanted to make text blink. And this is where it is. It's under text decoration. There are others that are available from drop-downs, but there's no guidance. For example, the orphan setting and the widows setting. All right, those fields are blank. So that's good. What does that mean? Well, you have to know what the defaults are, first of all. And in this case, for orphans and widows, it's 2. So let's say you want to change that number to, maybe you want a 3-line orphan or a 3-line widow. Just come in here and change it. All right, common question, why are most of the fields blank? And why does a field remain blank if I select its default option? And you'll see that almost every property dropdown has a default option invariably at the top of the list. So if I'm selecting the default option, it doesn't seem to work. The answer is actually pretty straightforward. If the field is blank, it means that that property is using your browser's default for that property. So browsers come with a basic or default set of default properties. I apologize, terrible sentence. But if the field is blank, that means it's using your browser's default. And your browser's default for that property may be the same as mine, or might be different, depends on the browser. Safari in many cases is similar to Edge, which is similar to IE, which is similar to Chrome, but there are some differences, and you have to know what browsers your users have and what versions of what browsers your users have, because you don't want to do something, you don't want to create an online output that's dependent on a property looking in a particular way, but it turns out that you've been doing QA on Chrome because that's what you use. But I use Edge, let's say. So you have to test. But it means it's using the default. So why use the default option? Well, maybe you made a setting for a property, and then you decide, nah, I want to turn that setting off. I want to zero it out and go back to the user's browser defaults. So you just use that default option in that property list. All right, so again, that was a fairly tangled sentence. And I'll say that we usually have time at the end to respond to questions, but I'll repeat what Jennifer said. If you have any questions, please type them in the QA pod, and we'll answer as many as we can. Those that we can't, MadCap will send me via email. I'll answer them, send them back to MadCap, and they'll send them out to you. So if you have a question that I can't answer today, I will have the answer for you. It usually takes me a couple of days. Anyhow, okay, so how do you create a new style? And the odds are you often don't have to, because the style sheet, the default style sheet, when you create one in Flare, comes with a lot of fairly standard styles. Head 1 through head 6, P for paragraph text, and a bunch of others. But it could be that you want to do something that maybe the default style sheet doesn't do automatically. Maybe you want a note style or a tip style, a caution style, something that's just not automatically created. So you select the style to use for the parent. And the most common one is P. And then up on the browser, the Stylesheet Editor toolbar, there's an Add Selector button, which basically means if you click this, you will be adding a child style. Type the name of the style. And one of the things that I'm going to show you, one of the examples that I'll show you in a minute, does exactly this, creating a new style. But you type the name, you make sure that the name is clear, which sounds like a silly thing to say, but there's always a temptation to name a new style something that makes sense to you, but that might not make sense to you 6 months from now, or it might not make sense to me after I get hired to replace you. So you make sure the name is clear, common English, like caution, warning, something like that. And you can also document styles when you create them, and it's a good idea to do this. Many styles uses are clear from their names, like caution or warning, but it's possible that I don't understand when a warning style should be applied or when a caution style should be applied. So you'd want to document that. What is the purpose of this style and when do we use it? And having typed the name, you specify the values for the properties, save it, and the style will appear in the Styles pane and on the style list on the home ribbon. Which brings me to, this is great. How do you view your styles? And the answer, as those of you who've had classes with me, you know that my standard answer is it depends, because there's various ways to view your styles. One way is off the Styles pane. On the main window, all you do is either press F12 or in the center of the main ribbon, there's a styles group. And one of the options says style window. And if you click that, you get this window on the vertical window on the right. Here's all your styles. This is great. Another option is the styles dropdown. And you, again, select the text or the stuff that you want to format. and then that style window in the same section of the ribbon drops down. You can do this anyway. You can use either approach. Personally, I don't like the styles dropdown. It works fine, but I find that it invariably covers up something that I'm trying to see. So I tend to use, to back up one slide, I tend to use the Styles pane. And I have dual monitors. So I'll just drag the Styles pane onto my second screen just to get it out of the way. So this way it's visible, but it's not using up space that I want to use for the topics. So again, personal preference. So there's the Style pane, here's the Style dropdown, and there's a third one, which is the Style slide out. So if you've created a child style for a style, what happens is you put the pointer where you want to do the formatting, and it's probably a little bit hard to read, but the second item from the bottom under that first dropdown says Style Class. And if you hover over that, you'll see a list of all the sub-classes. And there's one here, h1.neil. So again, it's another way to apply styles. All right, so tip. Either the first or second tip, depending on how we're defining tips. How do you hide styles? And you can hide a style, which raises the obvious question, why would you want to? And the answer is you want to simplify the styles list. So in other words, maybe you decide you're never going to use H6 in your project, so you want to get it off the styles list to simplify the styles list. And you may also want to remove it from the Stylesheet editor itself so that somebody doesn't accidentally come in and start playing with it and just modifying your CSS, your style sheet. And what you can do is hide them. And it's easy. So if we look at the next slide, we have, and again, I don't know if you can read this, so trust me when I say that the two circled items are the H6 style. So in other words, they're here. So I'm seeing them in the style sheet. I'm seeing it in the style sheet on the left and the Styles pane on the right. So I want to hide it. Not a problem. What I do on the Stylesheet editor is I just select the options option, the options drop down, and there's a disable styles option. Select that. And then in the right-hand column, I'll select the style that I want to hide. And I can either double click on it or I can click that double left arrow in between the two windows. And that style is now hidden. So that's cool. What's the effect? Well, if I come back to those two screens that we saw 2 slides ago, there's no H6 style. Apparently, it's gone. It's just not there. So that's good. It certainly helped shorten my styles list on the right. And it's just taken one thing out of the Stylesheet editor. So again, it simplifies things, makes them neater, cool, except, and this is a crucial point, whenever you're working with, almost whenever you're working with styles in the Stylesheet editor, you have to think about managerial issues. Many of the things that we can do in the Stylesheet editor do have managerial aspects, and you have to keep those in mind. Here, the aspect is if you hide, let's say you hide that style, and maybe 3 months later, you come back to the project, except you've forgotten that you hid that style in the first place, and now you're wondering, hey, where's H6? And you cannot figure out, why is the H6 style not visible? The answer is you hid it and then forgot it. So I've done this a few times in my career. Sometimes humiliation is a great way to remember something. The problem is, what if you have a new hire? Well, the new hire will never know that that style was there in the first place. So what you do, if you use this feature, you use it cautiously. Make sure that there's a good reason for hiding the styles that you're hiding. And I'm sorry, hang on a second. I'll apologize. Many years ago, I did some training for a software company that makes the software that calls you, the robot call software that calls you at dinner to try to sell you vinyl siding. And my experience is that every time I do a webinar, there's some sort of cosmic revenge, and I get at least 2 calls, robot calls. This hopefully was number 2. Make sure you document this. All right. Next thing, and again, what we're doing here is I'm giving you sort of a sampler of some of the cool, unusual, perhaps, things that you can do. So one of the next things is, for those of you who do print output, especially PDF, when you may have noticed when you're generating PDFs, let's say, is that you get excessive white space. And here's an example. So this is just a PDF and looks fine, but let me go up to the top and you can see there's some junk in here. Neil's title page type. But the important thing is, you see I've got a table of contents, and then on page 3 I have a topic. Then on page 4 I have a topic. But you see all the white space on page 3 and on page 4, and not too bad on page 5. Page 6 is just a mess because there's all that white space. So it's a waste of space, it's a waste of paper. Is there a way to fix it? And the answer is, of course, or I wouldn't ask. So let me show you how to fix this. The reason we're getting this page break is that if you look in the Stylesheet Editor, in this case for H1, the H1 style, and there's a functional group called the Print Support Group. And one of the options there, one of the properties, is the page break before property. And this is set by default to always, which means always throw in a page break before a head 1, which means you're getting all this white space. What you do is you simply change it. Change the default from always to avoid. And what happens is now all of a sudden there's no page break before a head 1. And that solves the problem, because now, to go back to my little demo, this topic, which was starting on its own page, now starts here, just below this last paragraph. This topic, which starts on its own page, would now start up here, just below this little blue Ipswich icon. So this is great. I'm eliminating a lot of wasted space, right? Yeah, but, and again, there's always a but. The problem, if I do this, is I have this topic called Synchronize Utility. And if I say avoid having a page break before a head 1, what's going to happen is that this topic is going to start here, just below the table of contents. And technically there's nothing wrong with it, but obviously that's going to look weird. So can I selectively apply page breaks? Well, yeah. And what I do is, and remember I said I was going to create a new style. So I would leave the page break before option set to the default, which is always. But then I would copy the head 1 style, the H1, and I would give it a name like H1 no page break. And I set the page break before property to avoid. So now what happens when I click on a topic title and I look in the Styles pane or drop down, however you're working, I'll see 2 options. I'll see H1, and then I'll see H1 no page break, here and here. And then I can pick the one that I want. So what I would do here in a case like this is I would apply the H1 to this first topic. synchronize utility. I would leave this set to the default H1 because I want a page break before this one. But then for this topic, what is WSFTP? I would apply the H1 no page break, which tells Flare, okay, grab this topic and move it here. So this eliminates a lot of white space. And I've actually done experiments with this where I've cut the length of a PDF by almost 40% in some cases. So it works fine. And I can now control where each topic appears. And I can do this not only for H1s, head 1s, but for head 2 through 6 as well. So this gives me enormous power to control exactly where my pages break. So this is great, right? Except, as usual, there's always the but. And the problem is it's an iterative task. So what I'd have to do, and again, to go back to my little demo, I would say, okay, if I look at this one, synchronize utility, I want the page break. Good. Then I go down to this guy and I'll say, okay, I want this one set to no page break, which means that this topic is now going to start up here. Great. So I generate the output, look at it, and all right, this topic, okay, this one, maybe it's working out that it opens up right here. But I have seen cases where, let's see if I can find a long one. Unfortunately, most of these examples are short. All right, right here. I have seen cases where if I said, make this no page break, what happens is that the topic title lines up at the bottom of page 13 and the topic body starts on page 14, and this just looks ugly. So what I'd have to do is apply the style, the appropriate style, generate the output, look at it and say, yeah, this looks okay through page 13. On page 13, I want to apply the page break. Okay, generate it. Yep, page 13 looks right. Go to page 14, and yeah, that's okay. Go to page 15. No, that's really ugly. In other words, you have to iterate, and it takes time. So what I would say is, if you need very nicely paginated, formatted, laid out print, and I have worked with clients like that, where they're actually using Flare as a PDF engine, as a PDF generator. And the first time I saw that, I was a little confused. You know, why are you doing this when that's not really Flare's primary purpose? And the answer made perfect sense. We have to do PDF now because that's what our clients want, and they want nicely laid out PDF, just like we've been generating with Word. But we know that we're heading toward online output, and therefore by going with Flare, we've got a tool that lets us create both PDF and online under very tight control. But for the moment, we need nicely paginated print. So we're going to do what you told us not to do, or what you told us you could do, but that was going to take time, the iteration. All right, two other quick things. One of them is dynamic graphics. And one of the arguments that's been in effect since I got into hypertext in '86 was, should we show graphics in online help and documentation? If you're ever looking for an excuse to get into a debate at a tech writing conference, just go to the bar and ask this question, and the answer will be yes, gives readers a visual reference, versus no, takes up too much screen space, plus the users can just look at the screen anyway, so why bother? And since I'm a consultant, my answer is always, it depends. And I usually tell people that I would not put down every single image, every single screenshot. That's overkill. But I tend to put down images that provide visual references or learning cues so that if I tell you here's 10 steps to follow, I'll put in a graphic at the end of step 10 that says if you did the last 10 steps correctly, this is what your screen should look like. It's like visual hand-holding. But what dynamic graphics do is they give us a midground. They let us show the graphic in a miniaturized form and then let the reader decide whether to see the graphic at full size. So here's an example. And I have the header that says, hi there, just showing something else. Then I have the title, thumbnail, demo, and then there's some text that says, here's an image of the insert image dialog box, and it's pretty tiny, it's thumbnailed. But in this case, when I hover over it, it blows up to full size, it expands to full size. So that's good. I have the option of seeing it at full size if I want, or just ignoring it if I don't want. And I can set this up to operate as a hover or as a pop-up or as a jump. So it's pretty flexible and it's pretty easy to create. What you do, if you want all your graphics to be dynamic, what you do is in the Stylesheet Editor, you select the IMG image style, and there's a thumbnail property there that lets you specify the size, the height, and width of the thumbnail image, and then what's the action that you want to apply. So if I want a thumbnail, and I find that I'm using thumbnail as a verb here, so if anybody is a former English major, I'll apologize. If I want all my graphics to be thumbnailed, I'll apply the thumbnail property to the image style, the IMG style. Or if I want to selectively thumbnail graphics, what I'll do is create a child style under IMG. Maybe I'll call it thumbnailed images and apply the thumbnail property to it. And select the activation method, again, hover help, pop up, whatever, set the size, and then I'll right click on the image and the topic, and I'll select that style class option that I mentioned earlier, one of 3 ways to see your styles. And sure enough, you make sure you save after specifying this style. A common problem is that you'll make some changes to the style sheet and you'll go to apply those changes and they won't be there. And it's because you forgot to save. This is classic. But you select the thumbnail style and that will apply it. All right, and the last cool trick that I'll show you is how to create note styles. And I'll say because we often create notes, tips, cautions, warnings, and other such collectively, they're sometimes called user notifications. And what we often do is insert a 2-column, 1-row table, and you put the icon in the left column and the text in the right column, and great, everything's cool, and you do this over and over and over and over again. And then somebody comes along and says, you know, we don't like the icon that you used for a caution. We want you to change it. So it's easy enough to do. What you can do is simply find each instance of that caution, click on the icon, change it, which, as you can imagine, is easy, but it's pretty inefficient. The second, better option is if you're comfortable working in code, you find the first instance of that caution or whatever. You go to that instance and you find the code for the image, and you do a search and replace. You find the code for that image, search for it, and specify the file name for the new image as the replace. And you just say find and replace all, and it will zoop through the entire project, do it for you. Yeah, that's great. But there's a more efficient way, and that is to create a note style. Caution, tip, warning, etc. Like this. And what you're doing is really setting it up as a custom bullet. So it's actually a list. It's a bulleted list, but instead of the usual black roundel or circle or square button, you're specifying a custom bullet like this. So here I've got little gray arrowheads, and pretty easy to do. How do you create this style? Well, these are lists. So what you do is you create a subclass of the list style. And over on the left, you can see the second line down is LI for list item. And up on the toolbar, the third item from the left is add selector. So I clicked on LI, clicked on add selector, specified that the name of the new child style that I want to create is arrow bullet. And then in the list group, under list style image over on the right, I'll go off and find the image that I want to use as the custom bullet, put it in, save, and I'm done. It's easy to do. It can take a little work. If I back up one slide, if you look at my 3 gray arrowheads, you notice that they're a little too high. So what I would have to do is make sure that there was as little space as possible below the custom bullet to make sure that it was better aligned with the horizontal center line. But that's an issue of just creating the bullet itself. But as far as changing, specifying the custom bullet, this is all you do. It's easy. And it's efficient, because now if you decide that, oops, we should have used the blue bullet, you just come back in here, change the list style image to blue-right.jpg or whatever, do a save, and the image will change everywhere instantly. So to sum up, as I say, there's enormous power in the Stylesheet Editor. There's an enormous number of features that I haven't even discussed. Basically, I've barely touched on the Stylesheet Editor. I've been working with styles and style sheets since, like I said, around 1999, and I'm still convinced that I know about half of what I can do with this. There's just so much here, including a lot of things that I have just never used. I've never needed to use. There are some things that I never thought I would need to use until I did. And as one example, for those of you who are doing responsive design, where you're creating an output that can be read on a big screen like a desktop and a tablet and a smartphone, the problem is desktops use different verbiage in some cases than mobile devices. So on a desktop, we would say click the button. Excuse me. On a mobile device, we would say tap the button. And I started looking into this about 4 years ago. And Mike Hamilton from MadCap and I came up with a way to dynamically change the wording from click to tap as the screen size changes. And this was done through the style sheet. And it's simple once you know how to do it. So what I would say is plan on reading a lot, plan on experimenting a lot. I usually suggest to people that you create a dummy project with a couple of dummy topics and then create a style sheet that you can destroy as an experiment. And blatant sales pitch, consider taking a class. MadCap offers a class in the CSS that has you spend about a day working with CSS, and you still won't be an expert, but you'll have a pretty good idea what you're doing or what you can do. All right, so on that note, blatant sales pitch, this is what I offer, training for various tools, including Flare, single sourcing, and something called VisiApps. That's a mobile app development tool. And on that note, let me turn this over to Jennifer for a second before we get to questions.
Great, thank you, Neil. That was wonderful. And so one last sales pitch. We've got a couple questions coming in. Again, encourage anybody to drop some of their questions in there, and we'll get to as many as we can before the end of the hour. Reminder, our learning conference, Mad World, is coming up October 8th through the 11th, and we'll be in Dublin, Ireland this October. And so there's still a little bit of time to get a registration discount. Pop over to our website. You can see the details there, including the schedule and the speakers, an amazing panel of educators lined up there. So we hope you can join us if you haven't already registered for that. Now, a few questions are coming in. And so let's go ahead and take some of those, Neil, if that's okay, and some good ones here.
Absolutely.
Is there a way to get a list of hidden styles?
Question, is there a way to get a list of hidden styles? Sorry, I repeat questions. I'm not sure I could stop. Is there a way to get a list of hidden styles? Technically, no. Although what you would do actually is you would just go to the Stylesheet Editor, select that options pull down, and then select the Disable Styles option, and that will open up the dialog box that we used. Let me back up a second. In other words, what you want to do is go back to, bear with me, this screen. Whoops, no, hang on, this screen. So it's options, disable styles, and you'll get this screen, and what you'll see in the left column is a list of all your disabled styles. But again, somebody would have to know that they can do this.
Great. And then there's a couple of people have this question, so I think this is a good one to ask. It was regarding the keep with next. So is there a way to set a keep with next for a heading? Maybe you don't want to do this on every paragraph. How do you, is there a more efficient way to do that keep with next kind of thing?
Oh, yeah, okay, there is. It's tedious, and I'm not sure I have time to answer this now. So Jennifer, would you make sure that that's in the list of questions that you send me, and I will respond to that?
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think we could definitely point out some, and everybody will get this, so some helpful screenshots to show how we can assign those types of features. So that would be helpful, I think.
Good.
So here's a great question. How would you handle multiple display sizes for images and thumbnails?
Okay, how would you handle multiple displays? There is an option that basically what happened until recently, until mobile devices came along, we could pretty much go with one size image and be done with it. But as we got to multiple display sizes, where we had different screen sizes, there's a new graphic display option that lets you specify different image sizes depending on the device. In a sense, it's almost like responsive design, but for images. And again, I will answer that in the questions list. It's an excellent question, and I imagine that any of you who are supporting output to mobile devices have to deal with this.
Great. Yep, we'll follow up with that. Question, do you recommend we use the TOC to set page breaks, or is it better to set specific classes of headings and paragraphs?
Okay, that's good. That's going to be that's an instant, it depends. I don't know. I could answer that. I could argue that both ways. But if you're obviously talking about doing this for print output, I assume PDF. And the times that I've done this, I'm just going to go to back to Flare for a minute. And what I will do, hang on a second, let me just open the topic. If I really need to set a page break within a topic, for example, I'll select on the insert ribbon over on the right in the text group, you see page break. So I can set it manually here, or I can set it through a style. The problem with setting it through a style is that I can argue that, yeah, I can set that for the head 1 through head 6 by specifying page break before always or page break before avoid. But when you start getting down into the content, the body of a topic, you may have so many variations as to where you want to set a page break that my experience is that it's too difficult to keep track of all the options, and I'll just physically put in a page break instead.
All right, great. Now, is there a way one can know which properties are even relevant to a style? What's establishing that, what's relevant or not?
Okay, is there a way to find out which properties are relevant? And the answer, okay, I'm giving a lot of evasive answers today. This is going to be another one. It depends how technically correct you want your code to be. Because technically, every single property is relevant. Realistically, not necessarily. Realistically, only those properties that you want are relevant. So for example, I could specify for a head style, I could specify the line spacing if I really wanted to, because that's an available property. The reality is I may not care about that, so that property is irrelevant to my needs for that style. So what I would do is, I'm sorry. What I would do is say, if I do not have to be 100% compliant with W3C coding, then I would just use only those properties that I needed and ignore the others. If I do have to be compliant with W3C coding practices, there are validators that you can use, one of which from the W3C World Wide Web Consortium is called Jigsaw. And what this will do is run an analysis on your style sheet and come back and tell you every single thing you've ever done wrong in that style sheet and in your life. It's going to give you this exhaustive list of errors, and you then decide, do I care? So in other words, the answer is really depends on how W3C compliant do you need your code to be. Most of us don't need that yet. So for any style, you just use the properties that are important and ignore the others.
Great. So in looking at the time, we want to be respectful of everybody's day here. So I think we're going to go ahead and wrap. If there's any further questions, feel free. This will be open for another minute or so. You can certainly put it in. A couple requests for the information you shared about switching between click and tap and how you use styles. So you'll see that. I think everybody could benefit from that. So we'll definitely put that in and share that with everybody who joined today. So again, Neil, thank you so much. This was really helpful. I hope you all enjoyed it. We definitely appreciate you taking the time with us, and we hope to see you on the next session, and we definitely appreciate it. So thanks again, Neil, and we'll talk to you all soon.
All right, my pleasure. Thank you all for coming. Hope it was useful.
Wonderful, thanks.